The Marunda Interfaith Network is pleased to present the second seminar in the series on compassion. I'm Philip Hughes and currently the chair of the network. As we start the seminar, I want to pay our respects to the First Nations people who cared for this land for many thousands of years, and especially the Wurundjeri people on whose land most of us currently live. The aim of these seminars is to learn about the various faiths around us, both that we may understand others, but also so that we are enriched in our own faith. Today we are focusing on Buddhism and its understanding of compassion. Damian Gauci will be leading our thinking. Damian is a member of the Chan Buddhist community in the Mahayana tradition and has made a study of the Buddhist faith. He also has a broad knowledge of other religious traditions, including the Christian faith. He is well equipped to present Buddhism to a multi-faith gathering.
All right, I've got something I want to share. Share with sound, I think. Let's begin. So I'll be talking about Buddhism and its understanding of compassion. I'm not going to look at the practices so much. This will be more of a, I'm going to look at Buddhism in terms of its understanding of compassion and how it may be different from other traditions. Okay, I'd like to also start with an opening prayer. This is a Buddhist aspirational prayer. It's by Santideva. He was an Indian Buddhist scholar at Nalanda University around the 700 AD. Later on, he became important in Tibet and in East Asia. He's got quite a few notable works, but I'm just going to start off with this opening prayer, just so you can get a feeling of the types of prayers that Buddhists would say, before perhaps a service or during their practice. May I be a guide for those on the path, a boat, a raft, a bridge for those who wish to cross the flood. May I be a lamp in the darkness, a resting place for the weary, a vase of plenty, a tree of miracles, and for the boundless multitudes of living beings, may I bring sustenance and awakening, enduring like this earth and sky, until all beings are freed from sorrow and all are awakened. So in the Buddhist tradition, I'm looking more so today from the Mahayana or Chan Buddhist tradition, also to some extent Tibetan Buddhism as well, but I'm looking from the Mahayana perspective. There's a few different schools of Buddhism. I'm not going to go into the details of that today, but we're going to be looking at the Mahayana tradition in particular and its understanding of compassion. So what is compassion? This is an interest. Perhaps these are some of the questions we might want to discuss when we break out into small groups. Is compassion a motivation or just a momentary state of consciousness? Is it fleeting? Does it just appear and disappear? Can it be constant? Is there constant compassion? Is it simply a disinterested or selfless concern for the happiness of others? Do we put ourselves in the picture or do we take it out? Is there a middle ground? These are some very interesting questions. What does compassion mean to you and your own faith traditions? I think this is something we might want to talk about later. Being the interfaith network, it's something we can discuss. And a chance, I think the whole idea of the Marunda Council Interfaith Network is understanding others, people from diverse backgrounds and different traditions, to foster an understanding and to foster compassion and love for those around us. So where to begin? Some of you can probably, I wrote a paper several years ago, which I published with Studies in Interreligious Dialogue. I looked at contemplation in the Catholic tradition, particularly the Cistercian tradition, and the Chinese Buddhist tradition. So I'm a very big fan of Thomas Merton. He was a Trappist monk, a Cistercian, which is a reformed tradition of the Benedictine movement. He was a social critic, and he was a prolific writer during his life. He died unexpectedly as well, as some of you might know, when he was attending a conference in Thailand. Now, he's inspired many of us to take up a spiritual life and a life of compassion. But where do we begin? Is there a proper understanding of compassion? What does it mean in the Catholic or Christian tradition, the Orthodox tradition, in the Islamic tradition? What does it mean? What does it mean from the Buddhist way of seeing things? Is there a proper understanding of compassion? In Buddhism, we do talk about a correct understanding of compassion, which we will look at towards the very end of this talk. Okay, so where did we begin? I only came across this quote several days ago when I was preparing for this this talk today. This is from Conjectures of a Guilty Bystander. It was published in 1966, and the words are very penetrating today, as they were when this book was published. Now, we're talking about compassion. To my knowledge, the opposite of compassion would be, what do you think? Violence. So I thought this would be a good starting point. I actually took this photo. It's at Altona Beach. I'm from the West originally. So I'm just going to read this for you. There's a pervasive form of modern violence to which the idealist most easily succumbs: activism and overwork. The rush and pressure of modern life are a form, perhaps the most common form, of innate violence. To allow oneself to be carried away by a multitude of conflicting concerns is to surrender to too many demands, to commit oneself to too many projects. To want to help everyone in everything is to succumb to violence. The frenzy of the activist neutralizes his or her work. It destroys the fruitfulness of his or her work because it kills the root of inner wisdom, which makes work fruitful. Just something I wanted to share just as a starter, just to pick everyone's brain, and just because I want this to be very interactive. I don't want to be talking right through. I hope we can have a good discussion about some of the themes that I will come across or address today. So, action alone does not define altruism. Okay. All right. Now, as human beings, we all have the potential to open our heart to others. We've got the capacity to be happy and compassionate to those around us, our colleagues at work, our friends, our family, but also we can easily succumb to what Thomas Merton calls an inner violence. And that's, to my knowledge, I think what he's moving towards is he's talking about the demands of the modern condition. And that, sometimes we need that space for us. That's the first point of healing and compassion. I think this is what Thomas Merton is trying to say. So where do we begin? Now, this is really interesting. Are we human beings or mere human doings? Do we have control of our lives or not? Does action alone define an altruistic or compassionate heart? Okay, we'll first look at some modern discussions centered around compassion or altruism, and then we'll move in towards the Buddhist understanding. Now, this is something we might want to discuss when we break out. Now, is self-interested or rational compassion or altruism a more realistic approach to that of the idea of a selfless altruism? This is something we might want to discuss a bit later. Now, this is a quote by Jacques Attali. Now, he's a very well-known political writer, And here he's alluding to the interdependence of human behavior as a starting point. Now he says, self-interested altruism is the transition between liberty and fraternity. I think our civilization will survive only if it can make it possible for each person to find happiness in the happiness of others. Peace at home depends on the reduction of poverty elsewhere. To me, when I read this, despite being modern discussion, I think these ideas have penetrated many spiritual traditions way before our modern day. Christ also lived a selfless life, and many spiritual teachers today and of the past have began by understanding others' suffering as a starting point on the path to God or awakening. Now, what does Buddhism tell us? Buddhism echoes a similar voice, particularly in the Chinese Buddhist tradition, particularly in a very lengthy text called the Avantamsaka Sutra, or the Huayan Jing. It echoes a similar voice in the sense that it sees the world around us as one single nexus of conditions where all phenomena simultaneously rely on and are reliant upon everything else. There's this interconnectedness. So where does compassion begin? Now, just in terms of the Chinese Buddhist understanding, I'm looking more at Huayan metaphysics here. This is a school of Buddhism. Seen in such a way, everything we do, every step we take, every little action, even just picking up this cup and having a sip of tea, affects and is affected by either remotely or intimately everything else. It's hard to see this, but I think this is how the world works. And this is the Buddhist understanding. It's got many similarities to modern philosophy as well, particularly some postmodern philosophical ideas, deconstructionism, and seeing the way things actually work. Now, Buddhist metaphysics understands the manifold as an essential part of the unit, and the unit as an essential part of the manifold. I think in Chinese it's 多即是一，一即是多. Everything is intricately connected in some way. So coming back to our discussion about compassion, kindness, and happiness, I think they're all related. Our happiness is definitely considered in terms of others' happiness. Just like Jacques Attali said earlier, how is it possible for us to find happiness? Like today, during COVID, when many places don't have a vaccine. I mean, how can we just be happy and complacent when there are others that are suffering in the world? I mean, I feel this when I'm with either my wife or my friend or Auntie Laura or any friends with Minyang is here. If there's a bit of a dispute or a misunderstanding, I won't feel well. I won't feel happy, neither will the other person. If I said something silly here, it would affect everyone. So, compassion in the Buddhist tradition. Now, in the Buddhist tradition, compassion goes hand in hand with wisdom. They're inseparable. These are the essential qualities that a Buddhist tries to develop, wisdom and compassion. They're not separate. Wisdom and compassion are often, used, are often compared to the two wings of a bird or our eyes. So, a bird can only fly when it's got two wings. One wing, it won't fly very far. Same thing in the Buddhist tradition. Enlightenment, the embodiment of enlightenment is wisdom and compassion. These are the qualities of enlightenment, if we can use conventional terms. Much like our eyes, if we can't see, we won't know where to walk. So wisdom and compassion are basically the foundation of the Buddhist path. And compassion is actually rooted in wisdom. It's not separate from it. And we're going to learn that a little bit later. And it's an aspect of the awakened mind or heart. So cultivating a compassionate heart. Now, in the West, as and to most people's understanding, wisdom and compassion are separate entities. With wisdom being something logical, or it comes back to our intelligence, and compassion is more of an emotional thing, our feelings. Now, in some instances, we may be led to believe that sentimental feelings and emotion obstruct our logical wisdom. Do they? Something to think about. Now, Buddhist understanding, however, is unique in the sense that it combines wisdom and compassion as the framework to the path to enlightenment, not just for oneself, but for the happiness and well-being of all sentient beings, whether physical, non-physical, human, non-human, animal, in the sea, the sky, and so on. It's the framework to the path. So what exactly is wisdom? Now, wisdom, or prajna, in Chinese is pora, in Sanskrit it's prajna, is understood as the discernment or understanding of the true nature of existence. Now, in Buddhism, it's the capacity to see three characteristics of phenomena. One is impermanence, that nothing lasts forever at all. Everything is in a constant flux. Dukkha, or the nature of suffering. And anatta, non-self. In Buddhism, we believe that the root of suffering is ignorance into the nature of existence, not seeing the way things really exist. Like the other day, I was worried about, I made a little mistake at work. I was giving, much like this, I was actually giving a presentation to a group of colleagues. And I addressed the talk. I thought they were actually a different audience because we've got colleagues in Australia and in China, and I just made a little bit of a mistake. And at the time, I just couldn't let go. There was that clinging, there was this fear and attachment, like, oh, have I lost my job? Did I say something wrong? How is this going to affect my career? But it all just melted away. It was a misunderstanding. That fear was real, but I didn't see its illusory nature. And because of that, we suffer. Now, in Buddhism, we say dukkha, but it's more than just suffering. It's dissatisfaction. It's the way the world works. It's conditioned states. Things are impermanent. Even in the Buddhist tradition, we believe that if you enter a deep meditative absorption, or jhana, that you will exit that meditation because it's a conditioned state. It's not awakening, and there is suffering because it's a conditioned state. And the other idea is anatta. Now, anatta is the idea that there is no self or exist. How could I put it? It's basically an understanding that in the Mahayana tradition and Chan in Buddhism, it labels, it's about emptiness. There is no self in the Buddhist tradition, which is a bit hard to kind of absorb. It's the absence of an inherent or independent existence. And this is kind of unique in the Buddhist tradition. Very, very unique. It's probably one of the only traditions where there's this idea that there's no inherent self or soul. Now, compassion arises from wisdom. This is very interesting. Where does it come from? Where do we begin? Now, generating a truly compassionate heart is founded upon wisdom. And this is actually understanding the nature of suffering, as well as the suffering of others. Now, to be aware of others' suffering, we must first become aware of our own suffering. And then we cultivate an aspiration or a motivation to free ourselves and others from suffering. We can't truly be happy if others are suffering. We can't truly be happy if we are suffering. If others suffer, we suffer. If we suffer, others suffer. So this is the Mahayana intention, liberation for oneself and all sentient beings. Now, we also develop a compassionate heart. In the Buddhist tradition, we remember the kindness of others. Now, Buddhism is also very unique in religious history, because Buddhism acknowledges the idea of rebirth. So in the Mahayana tradition, we believe that we've been reborn numerous times since inconceivable existence. And everyone at some point has been a friend, a foe, an enemy, a loved one, a mother, a father. And we understand this, that we are continuing in this cycle of suffering because of ignorance, because we don't see the true nature of things. We cling, and clinging in the Buddhist tradition, which is rooted in ignorance, brings about cyclic existence. Because we don't see the true nature of things, we cling to things, and that's where rebirth takes place. When we see the true nature of things, we let go. And this is the first point at where we eradicate suffering and exit cyclic existence. This is the practice of Buddhism. So we remember the kindness of others, the kindness they've shown us, and understand that other beings are also suffering because they don't identify the causes of suffering and understand that they can actually be uprooted and are completely eradicated. Now, this is a quote by a very famous Indian Buddhist scholar. And this really explains, this is looking more at the practice now, but this is a good understanding of Buddhist compassion. Now, moved by compassion, the Bodhisattva takes the vow to liberate all sentient beings. Now, unlike in earlier traditions of Buddhism, in the Mahayana, we take a vow to alleviate the suffering of others. Every morning before I begin my practice, I say a quick prayer. I say, I'll see if I can translate it. It's a 众生无边誓愿度，烦恼无尽誓愿断，法无量誓愿学，佛道无上誓愿成. Which it starts off with, I vow to deliver sentient beings, no matter how numerable they are. I vow to sever confusion, to study the Dharma and achieve complete awakening for others. If others are suffering, then I don't see how anyone could be awakened or reach a state of awakening by allowing others to suffer. Others' happiness equates to our own happiness. And in Buddhism, we believe that we create merit and virtue through helping others by developing a compassionate heart. Because we need to, in Buddhism, we believe that we need to develop not only wisdom and compassion, but also merit and virtue to take us further on the path. Now, then, by overcoming their self-centered outlook, they engage eagerly and continuously in the very difficult practices of accumulating merit and insight. Buddhists practice compassion to also accumulate merit, to propel them on the path to awakening, and to propel others on the path to awakening. Accomplishing the accumulation of merit and insight is like having omniscience itself in the palm of your hand. Therefore, since compassion is not only the root of omniscience, you should become familiar with this practice from the very beginning. So in Buddhism, there's even like at the end of a meditative session, Buddhists would say a dedication of merit prayer. They would transfer their merits to others. And this is also a way that we develop a compassionate heart, because we cannot move on the path to awakening. We cannot evolve as spiritual beings unless we love others. Now, in the Mahayana, particularly the Tibetan tradition, there's a very authoritative text called now I don't know how to say this one. I think it's translated as the practices of a bodhisattva. This is a Sanskrit word. And it's also written by Santideva. And he says, strive at first to meditate upon the sameness of yourself and others. We're no different. We might be from different traditions, different races, different ethnic groups, diverse backgrounds, but we all are the same in the way that we want to be happy and avoid suffering. In joy and sorrow, all are equal. Thus, be guardian of all as of yourself. This really reminds me of some of Christ's sayings, the hand and other limbs are many and different, but all are one. The body too kept and guarded. Likewise, different beings in their joys and sorrows are like me, all one, wanting happiness. Now, compassion and loving kindness form the essential attitude of the Mahayana tradition. And before we begin like a cycle of teachings or even just picking up a text and reading it, we try to develop a compassionate heart. We set our intention right. We must have our right intention to practice, which is to alleviate the suffering of others and ourselves. So their foundation is the generation of a non-self-cherishing attitude of mind focused toward the well-being and enlightenment of others. This is how we begin our practice. Now, the Bodhisattva, or a wisdom being, you can see behind me on the left and right of Amitabha Buddha, we've got Bodhisattvas. A bit like saints, they aspire to the well-being and happiness of all beings. And they accumulate merit at the same time to progress on the path, not just for themselves, but for others as well, so that others can also have the causes and conditions to generate awakening. Mind you, awakening in the Buddhist tradition cannot be generated. It's non-dual, because anything that arises is subject to cause and conditions and is impermanent. Now, moving on. Now, we're going to be now looking at this is the right understanding of compassion. Now, in Buddhism, there are 3 levels of compassion. This is Kalu Rinpoche. He was a renowned teacher in the Kagyu tradition of Tibetan Buddhism. So there's 3 types of compassion. There's compassion with reference to beings, compassion with reference to reality, and then compassion without reference at all. Let's have a look. So compassion with reference to beings. Now, this arises when we perceive and feel the suffering of others, when we understand the suffering of others and ourselves. It's kind of like the first step. And it is the first kind of compassion to arise and causes us to strive deeply to do everything we can to help others, but not to get lost in the world at the same time. A bit like Thomas Merton says, we don't always have to be actively out there helping others. Our intentions are also equally important as well. Now, it emerges when we perceive the pain and suffering of others. So this is the first level of compassion. Now, there is another level of compassion, and this is with reference to reality, the way things exist. Now, compassion with reference to reality arises when we have a genuine experience of the power of ignorance. It's ignorance that causes suffering. Because we don't see the true nature of things, we cling. And this, in Buddhism, we talk about karma. We need to eliminate our negative karma to attain awakening. You can think of it like a candle. As long as there's the wax, the flame, our presence in cyclic existence will be there. So compassion with reference to reality arises when we have a genuine experience of the power of ignorance, when we actually perceive how beings create their own suffering. In the New Age movement, which I'm not a big fan of, we often hear, we create our own reality. This actually is something which is much earlier. In the Buddhist tradition, we also talk about this. All phenomena arise from the way we perceive things. I mean, some might say this is a cup, others might say it's a vase. I could say it's a tool to drink with. We create our own reality through the misconception of the true way things exist. Now, this compassion occurs when we really see how others strive to be happy and avoid suffering, but how, not understanding the causes of happiness nor the means of avoiding suffering, they produce more causes of suffering and have no idea how to cultivate the causes of happiness. They are blinded by their ignorance. Their motivations and actions contradict one another. Through understanding the illusory nature of reality, genuine perception of this situation brings forth the second type of compassion. So Buddhist idea of compassion actually starts from where we are here and now. And the last type of compassion, compassion without reference. Now this retains to the notion of subject, object, or intention. Now, it is the ultimate form of a Buddha's or great Bodhisattva's compassion and depends on the realization of emptiness. So there is no longer any reference to me or other. There's no longer a reference to now, the past, the future. In one very famous Buddhist text, which I've just translated, I'm writing a commentary on the Diamond Sutra. There's one verse where it says, 过去的心不可得, 现在的心不可得, 未来的心不可得. The present mind cannot be attained, the future mind cannot be grasped, nor the present mind. Time is just a construct of our imagination. So there is no longer any reference to me or other. This compassion opens naturally and spontaneously. Okay? There's no subject, object, intention. There's no doer. It is important to be familiar with these three types of compassion, to understand their order, and to begin to work at the first level, which is the most acceptable to us. So I'd like to finish my presentation today just by a quick summary of what I've talked about. So in the Buddhist tradition, compassion begins through understanding the nature of existence, understanding the world, the suffering of others. And this is where we take our first steps. One cannot really become a bodhisattva and make a vow to deliver all sentient beings without actually understanding the nature of existence. Because we don't understand the nature of existence, we stay in cyclic existence and continue to suffer. Now, I'm not saying I'm a great bodhisattva, I'm far from it. But I think the most important thing is having the right intention when we practice. I mean, we could be at a charity, donating things, and these are all good. In the Diamond Sutra, I can't remember the exact verse. I've got it on my computer. You may be able to, offer dana or, innumerable wealth to a multitude of beings for their happiness. But at the end of the day, that happiness is fleeting, and it would be more appropriate to offer them the words of the Dharma to gain insight, because that will truly end suffering for ourselves and others. And I'd like to end with a Buddhist quote from the Dhammapada, or the Fa Chu Jing, and I'm just remembering it from my memory. A man or a woman or any being can win a battle 1,000 times 1,000 men. I'm thinking of an older translation I read. But a person who can conquer oneself is the greatest victor. A person who can really conquer their own mind is someone who can really generate compassion and kindness. So I think this is the gist of what I'm trying to point at. If we don't tame our own minds, if we don't develop wisdom, the wing of wisdom, the wing of compassion cannot take flight. Especially in an ultimate sense. Conventionally, yes, but in an ultimate sense, we can only be happy when we gain insight into the nature of existence. Thank you, everyone.